Hi, I'm Rhys Pugatschew, and here's my presentation on the discriminations that LGBT families face. These discriminations will be specifically socioeconomic discriminations, so a little less about social, though I do touch on that briefly. So, first thing we have to do is define what discrimination is. And according to the Cambridge Dictionary of Sociology, which sounded super official when I found it, discrimination is a practice whereby the cultural tastes of a dominant group or social class are projected negatively on groups or classes they consider inferior. So, those of us who have experienced discrimination already know that this affects just about every aspect of our lives. This includes legal, social, and economic consequences. So, all right, now we've got that down. What the heck is socioeconomic? Well, it's the combination of social and economic. We already got that down. But to better explain, according to the Social Science Jargon Buster, a great title, the term socioeconomic refers to a measure of an individual's or family's relative economic and social standing as determined by a composite of factors such as income, educational attainment, occupation, residential location, and social status in the community. Now, LGBT families face discrimination in all of those sectors. So first, I'm going to go through when you start family planning, you want to have a baby. Okay, now what? Well, one of you or someone has to get pregnant, or you adopt. But first, we're going to start with pregnancy. So it's not easy. Already, we're facing discrimination at fertility clinics, at even your GP, your general practitioner doctor, and never mind the costs. So first, you have to figure out what you want to do. So there's, speaking of fertility clinics, it's IVF, which is in vitro fertilization. So that's taking a sperm and inserting it. So someone does that for you. And there's also options where you take the sperm home with you and you insert it yourself. All of these have varying costs, and it also really depends if you want the donor known or not. Why are you looking at me like this? Alright, so you want a baby. Now what? This particular section does align with those who suffer from infertility. However, there is still discrimination that happens just because of who you are as an LGBT person or the lifestyle that you live. You face discrimination from all of the doctors, from every step of the way. The trouble of finding someone who is willing to help you, and not only help you, but actually go through with the process. Because sometimes they might be willing to help you because they're getting a paycheck out of it, but they will hinder you at every step of the way. They might even come up with fees that you never anticipated. It could be anything. So, trying to have a baby and trying to get someone pregnant while as being in a queer relationship is expensive, first and foremost. There are various processes, more than what I'm going to explain here. There's IVF, which is in vitro fertilization. This is where it happens outside in a petri dish, and then later they put it back. And then intravaginal insemination, this is what the straight people will constantly be asking. Why don't you just use a turkey baster? This is basically that. And then there is intrauterine insemination, which is where instead of just the turkey baster, it's actually inserted through into the uterus. So all of these options, except IVF, have washed and unwashed sperm. Those are my cats. I love them. Can you straighten the screen? Okay. And you're not paying for the sperm itself. That's technically illegal in Canada. However, you are paying for literally everything else they can possibly think of. This is transportation, this is vague service fees, this is the storage, this is the fridge they put it in to send it to you, this is the fridge they put it in once it's gotten there, it's the fertility clinic itself. It is anything. And so this process of getting someone pregnant can cost as little as $600. And in vitro fertilization is the most expensive process and starts at $7,500. And the storage fee, and this is after they've sent it to you, after you've paid all those services, and it's in the fertility clinic, that storage fee is $400 every year. So, expensive. That's an economic factor. And we're not even talking about donors yet. So let's get to that. Donors, this is a whole other thing. Queer families need a basic degree in family law in order to navigate this entire section. So you have to decide between known or unknown donors. You have to decide if you want a relationship with that donor or not. And the donor's consent is a legal thing that needs to be written down and everything. However, they will always have the rights to whatever child they make, regardless of whatever document you make them sign that says, I want nothing to do with the kid, or I want limited, or whatever. That is not a legal document that is valid in court. It's just something that you can do that helps the situation, that says that at one point they were in this mind. You're unhelpful. And then, even once the baby is born, the partner who did not carry the child has to adopt that child. They are not automatically the parent just because the both of you are married. This kind of discrimination is mostly red tape. It's bureaucratic. It's legalities. It's the definition of family that is not straight, that is not heterosexual. Not what?
Nuclear.
That's not a word in this textbook. If you want to take a better look into all of this, I do have the government documents in my works cited. And you can take a look with the details that they have there. Of course, even after you've read them, they're very unspecific. They don't necessarily define who is the parent and who isn't. Can you not, please? see, she's a troublemaker. Thanks. So, though discrimination against LGBT people is technically illegal, it still happens. And it is very difficult to sometimes confirm it, because sometimes it's just a phone call and we don't all record those. Sometimes there's loopholes in the law itself. For example, any of the doctors along these many steps, and any of these lawyers, any of these professionals can say, I don't feel qualified. And that can be anything. That doesn't make it illegal. It just says that they're not qualified, even though they're professionals in their field, and that's exactly what you need. So, if you don't want to go through the process of going to fertility clinics and trying to get pregnant that way, maybe you're just like, why don't we just adopt? There's plenty of babies out there, right? Well, yes, there are, but you have to find an adoption agency that is also willing to accept you. Not all of them are willing to accept queer couples. And unfortunately, here in Alberta, there is only one left, and it is religious-based. So they make you sign all kinds of things that say, make sure that you believe in their religion and make sure that you abide by that religion and all kinds of things like that. There are classes you have to take for adoption in general, but with religious adoption agencies, that is all the more specific. And you cannot adopt nationwide. If there's an adoption agency in BC that looks really good to you, and they seem really nice, and you live in a different province, you can't adopt from there. And there's no national adoption agency. It's per province. It's tough, to say the least. All right, so let's say you navigated that minefield, you got through it, someone's pregnant, you got a baby. Fantastic. No more sleep, right? Well, one of the many things that LGBT families struggle with is community. Especially in places like Alberta, unfortunately. Mommy groups are one of the main sources of community, solidarity, and information for any parent out there. However, these mommy groups are often very exclusive. They usually have very few queer people in them, or none at all. So, to be more clear, a mommy group is a group of women who may or may not know each other before having children, who join forces to navigate the world of motherhood together, whether they're in person or online, like Facebook, lots of Facebook. 70% of moms, now this statistic is unconfirmed, agree that their inner circle of moms is their largest source of support. So if you're having trouble breastfeeding your kid, who do you go to? This mommy group. It's little things that you ask advice for that maybe you're not sure, because Google tells you everything, not just one opinion. So that's where mommy groups come in, and unfortunately, LGBT folk aren't always welcome. In addition, queer folk are often estranged from their biological family. And as such, they don't have that generational grandmother or grandfather or uncle or aunt that is able to give advice and say, this is what happened when I did it. none of that is there sometimes. And then some kids from queer families grow up without extended family. And I can't say that it's missing much, but it is nice to have the feeling that you came from somewhere, that you have ancestors. And, you know, it's also sometimes difficult to relate to other kids when they're talking about grandma's cookies or grandma's soup and all of this. You don't experience that. And most of the time that's fine, but it is something that some queer kids have to miss out on, and it kind of sucks. Other discrimination that LGBT families face, not just with the infertility, you've already navigated all of that. Now, if one of you is in the hospital, if one of you is sick, you have to face those discriminations all over again. Because in the hospital, it's the family-only zone, right? Well, whether you're married or not, it's the doctors and the nurses that decide whether or not you can be in that room. Even if it's technically illegal and you can stir up a fuss about it, they can still do it, and it sucks. Because you're fighting every step of the way, and this is for your family. Alright, so, moving on from that. So, how does all of this connect to the textbook and the course itself? Well, unfortunately, there's very little in the textbook itself. We have, as you can see written, Chapter 5, page 98, Deciding to Parent, and it's one paragraph that discusses how folks can acquire a child, which I just discussed with IVF and the like, and how there are different kinds of parents. So they discuss the standard donor relationship, which I'm not entirely sure is standard, but sure. Whether or not you have a relationship with the donor for your child or not. And it can be a very different world to navigate because you're not necessarily related to these people, but they're part of your family now. And that's still your choice. And that is, again, very different from heterosexual couples. So, those are not all of the discriminations that LGBT families face. Goodness, no. It is far more detailed and intense than all of that. But this is just a short presentation to at least brush on the subject. So, some things to consider after maybe learning all this, if it's new to you, is if you're not in the LGBT community, how do you think LGBT folk handle this discrimination? How do you think we handle it when a doctor or a lawyer or someone professional says, no, I don't feel qualified to do this? Or another question you can answer is, how do you think the government has or should combat these discriminations? What do you think the government can do better? What sort of changes to the family law should there be? What sort of changes should there be to defining donors and surrogacy and the costs ensued? Because none of this is covered under Alberta Health Benefit, let me tell you, none of it. And the last question if you'd like to answer, is what do you think you can do to help the LGBT community, whether you're a part of it or not, to help them combat this discrimination? If a friend of yours is facing this, or a family member, how would you help them? Okay, so that's the end. See you guys. Bye.